subscribers. I appreciate you all. I just hope I do the videos justice. So thank you. We're going to read this one today. Kids who kill. What turns a seemingly innocent child into a cold-blooded murderer? Shockingly, some of the most heinous crimes imaginable have been committed by children. Here we look at cases involving some of the world's youngest convicted murderers. Girl Next Door. Alyssa Bustamante was just 15 years old when, with the help of her younger sister, she lured her neighbour Elizabeth Alton to her death in St. Martins, Missouri, on 21st of October 2009. Bustamante convinced her sister to bring 9-year-old Elizabeth to the woods by their home, telling her she had a gift to give her. But 5 days earlier, Bustamante had dug a grave in the woods. When Elizabeth arrived, Alton strangled her, slit her throat and stabbed her in the chest, before putting her in a grave and covering her body with mud and leaves. Bustamante was raised by her grandparents after her father was imprisoned and her drug addict mother was deemed unable to care for her or her siblings. She suffered with mental health issues and listed on her YouTube page that her hobbies were cutting herself and killing people. The teen admitted that she wanted to know what it was like to take someone's life and had dug another grave in addition to the one she used to bury Alton in. This magazine is printed wrong because it says when Elizabeth arrived. Alton strangled her, but the neighbour is Elizabeth Alton. So I'm assuming that's supposed to say Bustamante strangled her. Anyway, we'll carry on. But 5 days earlier, Bustamante had dug a grave in the woods. When Elizabeth arrived, Bustamante strangled her, slit her throat and stabbed her in the chest, before putting her in a grave and covering her body with mud and leaves. Bustamante was raised by her grandparents after her father was imprisoned and her drug addict mother was deemed unable to care for her or her siblings. She suffered with mental health issues and listed on her YouTube page that her hobbies were cutting herself and killing people. The teen admitted that she wanted to know what it was like to take someone's life and had dug another grave in addition to the one she used to bury Alton in. It was later revealed that her original plan was to kill her 2 brothers. Police investigating the young girl's disappearance became aware of Bustamante's history and soon identified her as their prime suspect. At her trial, disturbing extracts of her diary were read out to the jury. She wrote, "I just killed someone. I strangled them and slit their throat and stabbed them. Now they're dead. I don't know how to feel at the moment. It was amazing. As soon as you get over the oh my god, I can't do this feeling, it's pretty enjoyable. I'm kind of nervous and shaky though right now. Okay, I gotta go to church now, lol." Bustamante arrested and charged with murder. During his trial, shocking revelations emerged that, before the attack, Price had stalked another lone woman. The judge stated this did not arise out of a sudden loss of control or heat of the moment. He persisted with his plan to target a lone woman. Lindsay's family released an impact statement saying, "As a family, we are completely devastated that Lindsay has been taken from us so suddenly. wife has shot herself and is not breathing. Their son is weeping and crying in the background, asking why his mother would do such a thing. At one point, he asks his dad if he'll remarry. His father replies, "I don't know, bud," but with a little laugh. Almost from the start, police were baffled. If Amy had died by suicide using a gun, shooting to her right ear, why were her arms at an unusual 45-degree angle? And why was the gun lying by her side? Why were there lots of drops of blood all around the bedroom? And why were there large smears of blood down the hall towards the utility room? Blood that only showed up under the chemical luminol, a substance that reacts under UV light to reveal the presence of human blood. So had it clearly been wiped up by someone. Usual suspect. As is customary, the police turned their attention to the person closest to the deceased, the spouse. Did Stephen kill Amy? When Stephen was questioned at the police station, he was calm, pleasant, helpful, and consistent in everything he told them. He seemed to be telling the truth and did not seem rattled. They searched through all his electronic devices. As a freelance IT consultant, he had several phones, tablets, computers, SD cards, and hard drives. They then found something interesting. Stephen had had an affair. When questioned, he admitted it. He was ashamed and had moved past it, he explained. He said that in their church, divorce was simply not an option and that he had never dreamed of leaving Amy. But there was more than one woman Stephen had cheated on Amy with. In fact, he had joined notorious website Ashley Madison, where married people hook up with each other for sex. Of course, this didn't mean Stephen had killed his wife. Plenty of men, even men of the church, have flings and affairs. But circumstantial evidence was mounting. There were suspicious searches in his internet history, including the place where Dog Day God had wanted Amy killed in a road accident. Bitcoin transactions, checks on his wife's life insurance, and searches on details about her family and their whereabouts. Finally, the police got their bingo moment. It was in the form of a long code number that had been saved to Stephen's cloud, even though he deleted it from his phone. The code was connected to a Bitcoin payment that Dog Day God had used to pay off the fake hitman agency. Confident they had a case, they charged Stephen with Amy's murder. In court, his defense team could not deny the code number was saved to Stephen's phone, but said there was no proof it was his, as his phone could have been hacked. The jury thought otherwise. After only 8 hours of deliberation, they found him guilty of murder, and he was sentenced to life in prison, where he maintained his innocence. Unbearable truth. In Amy's autopsy, they found that she had huge amounts of a date rape type drug called scopolamine. was cruelly snatched away from her and left her son without a mother. But perhaps her family take comfort in the fact that she died believing her husband loved and adored her and would never do her harm, and that Stephen Allwine, now 46, will never be a free man again. he was again given a plea deal that left him free. In January 2016, Tyler was living with his grandparents when he threatened to kill himself with a knife. They called the police, and officers were forced to deploy tasers and beanbag shots to subdue him, breaking his hand in the process. Just a few months later, it's been alleged Tyler's grandparents, now in fear of their own lives, told the landlady at Tideview Bath he was a good kid and he was allowed to move in across the hall from Verbeke. It was the first time he had lived outside of his family's care. It was 10 days before the murder. Around 6:30 p.m. on the 6th of May, a few hours after Verbeke's body had been found, Tyler's mother, Heidi, became concerned when she couldn't get in touch with her son. Worried he might be suicidal again, she drove to the French King Bridge in Gill, where Tyler had previously threatened to kill himself. She found him there, drunk. After Heidi drove him to her home in Montague, a distressed Tyler told her he was a bad person and should be dead. At 8:21 p.m, Plymouth police phoned, looking for her son after the incident at his apartment block. She told them he was sleeping, and they asked her to let him sleep until an officer got there. At 8:46 p.m, Heidi called them back to say he'd fled. They tracked his phone to the bridge, but they were too late. Bystanders reported hearing a splash, and it was assumed Tyler had jumped into the icy depths of the Connecticut River. The next day, Heidi found his journal in the back of her car, and inside was a terrible confession. Hagmeyer wrote that he'd planned to kill himself, but instead had entered Verbeke's flat and stabbed her to death. He wrote, "I had nothing against her, and I don't know why I did it." On 30th of May, Tyler's body was pulled from the river. The conspiracy. Seeking to find peace, John began filming documentary How to Survive a Murder, shown on Sky Crime. On Facebook he posted, "We are a filmmaking family, so one of our first decisions was to make a film about Mum's life, Tyler's life, where they intersected, and the long series of events that led up to this terrible tragedy. They asked Tyler's friends and family to get involved, but Heidi then took to social media to plead with them not to respond, saying, 'I have reason to believe their intentions are not honourable.' But she and John had already met. 9 days after the murder, John visited the French King Bridge, and then he headed to the home of Justin Furman, the neighbour Tyler stabbed in 2011. In a twist of fate, he called at the address he'd found in police records and found himself a face-to-face with Heidi. John details how he embraced her and said he didn't feel anger or blame towards her. Later, he called to invite her to Verbeke's memorial, but was shocked when Heidi revealed she was getting married on that day. At this point, her son was still missing. A few weeks later, John phoned Heidi again, but this time she refused to take his call, saying she had been advised not to talk to him anymore. And she was not the only one. As John continued his quest to find out about questioned whether this was because of the negligence, incompetence, or something much darker. It also seemed that rather than own up, senior officers claimed Tyler was being treated as a witness and not a suspect at the time. John said, "It made me think that there was more to what happened than I knew about." Adding fuel to the fire, John discovered that despite Tyler's suicide, the case had not been closed, but instead was suspended. This meant he was not entitled to see any evidence. This time, he took aim at the DA, posting, "What is DA Tim Cruz hiding?" And it seems this public attack did the trick. The case was closed, meaning John could access the case files, including the police dispatch logs, and they held the key to the whole sorry tale. The resolution. John realised he had been labouring under a fundamental misconception the entire time. He believed that the Montague officer had been at Heidi's house before Tyler escaped. But there was a known issue with the clocks at the police station. They were all wrong, and the only way to know the exact time of the incident was via the dispatch logs. When he assessed them, he realised the officer had arrived there much later. By that time, Tyler was already on the bridge. In addition, the first calls between the forces confirmed that Tyler was originally being looked for as a witness. It was only when he went on the run from his mother's house that he became their suspect. Florence would continue to be moved from institution to institution until she eventually died in hospital. Eager to carve out a new life for herself, by 1941, Evelyn had changed her name to Anne Hamilton and married farmer Lionel Harris. Her need for reinvention also saw her have numerous cosmetic surgeries. The newlyweds planned to adopt a child and set their hearts on a baby boy from Bernardo's adoption agency. It seemed as if Anne's dream of a new life was about to come true, until tragedy struck. Lionel was killed in a car crash just before they were to finalise the adoption. Losing both her husband and her dream of a baby was something she would never recover from. Alone and in need of respite, Anne immersed herself in the practice of yoga. It had been gaining in popularity, and she said it helped her achieve spiritual peace. She loved the sense of community it gave her and began to lead classes for local women, mostly the wives of wealthy professionals. She discovered people would follow her easily, and so, in 1960, she became a tantric yoga instructor. Her classes blended yoga with philosophical teachings and were a huge success, offering spiritual guidance to middle-aged women, and assembled a group of people who were looking for help. Their children had left home, their husbands were having affairs, and they became her family. A group of women who loved and respected her. But Anne's need for control and her fear of abandonment were beginning to turn into a sinister plan. She convinced many women in her group to divorce their husbands, leaving them with only Anne to turn to. She became all important to them, unbeknown to the vulnerable suburban housewives. Anne's talent for manipulation was about to help her get what she desired more than anything else: children. But she needed to expand her small yoga family, and for that she needed powerful allies who could help her. A new alliance. In 1962, respected academic Dr. Rayner Johnson became her goal. With his help, Anne would be able to legitimise her group and gain influence with respected professionals. She slept with his gardener to glean private and professional information about him, information she could use to convince him she was a clairvoyant. One day, which Johnson would later refer to as the Day of Destiny, she knocked on his front door. She told him she knew he was going to India and that his wife was going to get sick. Both turned out to be true, and from then on, he believed she was the Messiah. She continued to feed him lies, including convoluted tales about her past, and told him that she wanted to give him eternal life. Johnson had recently become interested in metaphysics and was particularly susceptible to claims of divinity. In May 1963, Anne performed her first miracle when one of her clients was involved in a car accident. She injured her eye so badly, doctors told her it would leave her partially blind. Anne immediately organised a spiritual help that healed the woman without lasting injury. And Johnson told his wife it convinced him of Anne's reincarnation as the female Christ. apocalypse was coming and that they were responsible for re-educating survivors. By 1968, Anne had assembled a 500-strong following. The group was comprised of high-powered individuals, lawyers who could defend the family in court and forge passports, doctors and nurses who gave Anne access to elderly people who would surrender their fortunes to her, and judges who would sentence anyone who threatened them. Rayner was an invaluable asset, but she'd also made another union that was to prove essential. Dr. Howard Whittaker worked at a private psychiatric hospital that used psychedelic drugs to treat patients, specifically LSD, one of the most potent hallucinogenics in existence. Anne was able to lure Whittaker into getting illegal prescriptions, which she used in initiations she called clearings. Every new member would be put into a room and injected with LSD, then left. After a few hours alone, Anne would appear in a doorway wearing a white gown, enter the room and convince them they were seeing Jesus Christ. Baby snatchers. By now, over a quarter of the sect was made up of doctors, nurses and other medical professionals, and Anne began using them to set in motion her plan to achieve the ultimate dream. She began stealing newborns. The first child Anne stole was Sarah Moore. The doctor delivering her was Rayner Johnson's daughter, a member of the family. As soon as Sarah was born, a pillow was placed over the mother's head and she was injected with tranquilizers. She was just 16 years old. The biological father had run off and she had been disowned by her family. It all made her a perfect candidate for Anne's plan. Sarah didn't know Anne wasn't really her mother until she was a teenager. Anne continued to steal children for years, using the cult's lawyers, who forged papers for new additions to the family. Some of the social workers in the cult also created an additional source by bypassing regular legal routes for adoption. Sometimes mothers even gave their children to Anne in exchange for miracles. She would enlist corrupt doctors to poison family members who had a young child, then offer to cure them in exchange for giving up the child. When the woman agreed, she would order the doctors to stop poisoning her and she would make a recovery. In 1971, Anne moved her first 7 children to a house at Lake Alden in Victoria called Uptop. The children were all aged 3 and under and thought they were siblings. Uptop was hidden in a wooded area and other family members bought property in and around the area. The members wanted to stay close to their leader for fear of the apocalypse. With the advent of nuclear weapons, they were told by Anne the world could end at any moment. She said that, while the rest of the world would be annihilated, the children she had chosen to save would survive. The children were told they had been given the responsibility of perfect children who would save the world. Anne was securing what she called the white master race, dressing them in identical clothing and giving them identical haircuts. She did not hide them from public. Instead, schoolroom. The children were punished for any deviation from their regime, and beatings and other forms of torture were common. In one harrowing incident, a family member who had come to teach the children art noticed his brushes were missing. When he informed the aunties, they gathered the children together, filled a bucket of water, and dunked their heads underwater. The children were brought to the brink of drowning for hours. Anne encouraged the punishment and seemed to take pleasure in the torture, asking the aunties to hold the phones so she could hear them scream as they were beaten. More abuse. In the mid-1970s, the cult built a brick temple across the road from Raina Johnson's home. There, they would commune on Sundays and Thursdays for the LSD-fueled sermons. They also began giving the children LSD in an attempt to expand their minds. When Leanne Crease turned 14, she endured the initiation ceremony, referred to as going through. She was injected with LSD and locked in a room where she was kept dosed up for days. She screamed so loudly during the ordeal, neighbours across the lake called police. The charismatic Anne welcomed them in and served them tea as the children were stuffed into a crawl space covered with plywood. The children were kept in the hole until the police left. They were too afraid to scream for help. It was far from the first time authorities had been called to Uptop. The police had discovered the children on several occasions, but Anne had prepared them with the scripts on how to answer difficult questions. She told the children that the police were evil thugs, and if they were discovered, they would be beaten and raped. The children, who had no idea the way they were living was abusive, were also starved. The kitchen cupboards and fridge were padlocked. The children were weighed regularly, and if deemed too heavy, Anne would hold food. As a result, the children would make themselves sick before the weigh-in to reduce their weight. The girls were taught that pubescent changes were nasty, vile, and dirty. Anne made all the girls incredibly phobic, and each of them entered adolescence with body dysmorphia and a complete lack of understanding of their own bodies. They were told they needed to stay thin for the future of the human race. But Sarah had found a way into the auntie's room and began making herself toast and Vegemite whenever she could. She was discovered when she wiped the butter knife on a towel and found herself the recipient of Anne's fury. She was brutally beaten and thrown down a flight of stairs, but Sarah was getting older and more defiant. She began to take long walks, and one night she came across a household who had left their window open. She broke in and stole all the food she could, stashing it in the woods. She then began leading her brothers and sisters out at night to break into nearby homes and find food. The starving, miserable and scared children were beginning to rebel against the family. The end. In 1978, Anne married Englishman William Bill Byrne, an ex-RAF officer who was incredibly rich. Anne had amassed a large fortune herself and had properties all not shy about telling Kathy and Helen of their unhappy existence and began referring to themselves as POAs, prisoners of Anne. One night, Kathy and Helen's mother, Erica, drove the girls home, and Sarah invited Erica into Uptop. When Anne learned what Sarah had done, she threw Sarah out of the family, telling her, "You are no longer our daughter. Go out there and die in the gutter." Sarah went to live with Kathy and Helen, and after divulging stories about her upbringing, Erica took her to the police. State and federal police raided Uptop on the 14th of August in coordinated raids on other properties and found huge stashes of illegal drugs. But Anne was far from the drama, safely residing at her home in the US. The cult began to disperse as many feared legal action. Dr. Howard Whitaker's practice was disgraced and Rayner was blacklisted, but nobody was prosecuted. However, in June 1993, Anne and her husband were extradited to Australia to face charges of conspiracy to defraud and committing perjury by falsely registering the births of 3 unrelated children as their own triplets. The charges were eventually dropped, but Anne pleaded guilty to a lesser charge of making a false declaration. For that charge, Anne and Bill paid $5,000 each in fines and walked away free. Anne died in June 2019, aged 97. At the time of her death, she had a personal fortune of $10 million and was protected from any form of prosecution by her dementia diagnosis. Shortly after the raid, she was asked in an interview why she did what she did, to which she replied, "Because I love children." But the heartbreaking legacy of the family lives on in the children who were raised in its practices. What happened to the children? Sarah Moore. Although Sarah initially thrived and went on to become a doctor, she was depressed and attempted suicide many times. Moore wrote a book, Unseen, Unheard, Unknown, detailing her experiences. Eventually, the strain of her upbringing took its toll, and she passed away in 2016, age 46. Adam Lancaster. Adam was adopted into the cult when he was just days old and was 17 when it was raided. Rather than become a ward of the state, he decided to stay with Anne. He left in his 20s, becoming homeless and addicted to drugs. He now lives on a disability pension and has mental health issues. Ben Shenton. Adopted into the cult at 18 months old,